Hello, my name is Richard Diver, and I am joined by my colleague Rin, author of the SOC Process Framework. This is video 7 of an 8-part series. In this video, we're going to take a deep dive into the technology, processes, and procedures. We recommend that you follow along, opening this workbook in your own Sentinel instance. So if you haven't already done that, stop the video, go do that, and then come back. All right, hopefully you're back by now. So Rin, tell us more about this section. What are we doing with technology, processes, and procedures?
Thanks, Richard. I'm really excited about this section. This is more on the engineering side of the SOC. So the technology, processes, and procedures really fits to, how to build out analytics, right? So we're going to talk about that today in the content development design, where to store network diagrams, how to think about data retention and architecture. We're also going to be looking at Azure infrastructure monitoring, as well as any engineering incident management, and then the role-based access or user access control design as it pertains to Azure Sentinel. So all of these pieces really snap to the engineering side of things. And so on the workbook here, I've clicked on the design process, and you can kind of see under the design process some of the pieces that I've just highlighted. The lead engineer is going to provision and maintain the appropriate conceptual design content within Azure Sentinel. That's really what their role is. Their role is to make sure that they're thinking through those analytics, they're thinking through reports and metrics and the things that are built into the workbooks. They're also thinking about making sure that the right role-based access is applied, who has access from a SOC perspective, who needs access to any additional resources that may live within the subscription that Sentinel is tied to, right? But they're also looking at how use cases are defined. They're thinking about it from not only the analytics side, but they're partnering with their analysts. They're partnering with the way that incidents have been triaged, lessons learned in the post-mortem activity, the daily tasks that we've talked about. All of that data really helps to leverage the right kind of framework that we want to put, right, and the methodology behind the use cases and the way that they're defined, they're tracked and completed. And so this is really that engineering side of things. And then we have kind of called out like the roles and responsibilities. Again, this is kind of leading out on what the manager is responsible for, the lead engineer, and what they're responsible for. And this ties into the interfacing with local organizations to obtain that essential modeling data. Maybe they need that data to model things out prior to building out a use case and implementing it into production. Understanding how to effectively support the SOC. What does that look like, right? So maybe they're tied into the daily or the weekly operations calls and the things that are going on so that they're plugged into what those lessons learned are offering. So they need to understand what, each of the other roles and are doing within the SOC. So a SOC analyst is responsible for providing that feedback on the modeling and any use case design effectiveness. So if we're thinking of a use case, I'm thinking I've got these IP activities. They're coming from a nefarious place on the internet. They're trying to access assets on my in my cloud or on-prem. What does that look like? How are they trying to access? What services are they trying to communicate over? Are there controls in place against those services? Are there things that mitigate that activity? Or are we just monitoring and we've accepted risk? What does that look like? That way that you can talk with that lead engineer and make sure that that effectiveness for those use cases are exactly what you need them to do so that you're alerting effectively, and then you can apply the right triage and incident response process because you know that that alert has been designed in a way that delivers on the right type of indicator of attack, the right type of indicator of compromise, and leads that level of credence back to the analysts and the knowledge that they need to make a right decision. So this is at a high level, this really is kind of what that is. This section is really light. It's a lighter section because there's a lot of placeholders in this section. And so the first placeholder is kind of the architecture. You can see here holds architectural design documents for services. This is a great place to put Visio diagrams or, screen captures, things that are going on from service to service communication, things within, hybrid cloud postures from, GCP to AWS to Amazon or to Azure, and how they may be interconnected through communication. This is a great place to put things that are on-prem and the way that things communicate, how identities move around and have access to certain things, right? This is a great place to store certain things to help level up your analyst, get a good repository going. You want to protect this data, of course. You certainly don't want attackers getting access to that, but you do want a good place so that you're not having to continue to go back to those organizations and to have them teach you how certain things work within their line of business, so that you are now more knowledgeable around the type of decision that you need to make when you see a high value asset that ties back to that business owner, right? Or you see an app or a service that's communicating to something that based on the diagram it shouldn't be communicating to, or an identity logged in and accessed data pertaining financial records that is tied to the financial organization, but they have no business logging in to access financial records. All of those kinds of scenarios can lead back to this type of architecture and help an analyst be able to understand why that's important to make the decisions they're making.
Yeah, I would say, I think we said it in one of the previous videos, but we'll say it again here. This can be a great place if you're a small team, use this as to actually store the documents. But if you're a larger, more complex team or organization, you've already got this documentation somewhere, use this to link to that documentation. Whichever way you go, don't let it get out of date. Make sure you know, when do I have the latest designs for the latest and greatest features and products. And I would also go back and say that from an architectural perspective, this should be reviewed on a regular basis to ensure that you have everything you need in order to carry out a strong security architecture before you buy anything else. And especially when something's due for retirement or renewal, these are great times to look at and reflect and think, was this thing that I bought 3 years ago still good today? Or maybe now I've got 3 products that do all the same thing. I have seen companies with multiple CASB solutions and they were looking to buy another one because they didn't know they already had them. So definitely a good time to have a think about all the different aspects and how do things interplay. And one last one I'll add to this is look through that architectural list and go, am I getting logs and signals from every one of those components? Because again, we find time and time again, SIMs in the past didn't always have everything logging into them because that becomes very large and expensive and noisy. And so sometimes they only have certain things like file logs, endpoint logs, and identity logs, but there's a breadth of system noise that you might want to start gathering to get that deeper signal.
I love that. Absolutely. Yep. Couldn't agree more. I think this is a great segue into thinking about those things architecturally and the value that they bring to the table. Thank you, my friend. Well said. Appreciate that very much.
I've done it a few times now with many partners around the world, so I've got a little bit of experience here.
There you go. I love it. Let's transition now to data retention. This really is kind of you can go and look at data retention inside your Sentinel instance. So that's nothing new. But what we've done here is we've kind of broken down data retention into a standard, right? So looking at it from like governing requirements, PCI, Sarbanes-Oxley, HIPAA, or other government-related, industry, I'm trying to think through the thought here, Richard. Government-related compliance, things that they've got to snap to, sticks, GDPR, right? Other types of things.
And it's all constantly changing as well, right? And depending on which country you're in, which industry you're in, sometimes it's 2 years, it could be 7 years. It's definitely important to understand what you have to do versus what you also should do. Like, what is a reasonable amount of time to keep data? And it might not be the default 90 days that Sentinel provides.
Totally. And there's a couple things to consider here too. We can certainly ratchet up the data retention inside log analytics, which is what we're going to show you here within the workspace level retention. So you can increase it beyond that 30 days, 90 days, right? Depending. And looking at it from the workspace, we give you steps on what to look at along with screenshots and things to consider. And when that retention is lowered, right, there's we call it a several-day grace period before that data that's older is removed, right? And then that new retention setting is set. That older data is kind of carved off, right? So there is a grace period should you ever decide, oh, okay, well, I want to put that back. Maybe that's something I was too hastily or too hasty on making that decision. I want to put that back. So we certainly do that, but there are other types of ways of thinking about data retention. We also call out data retention by type, looking at maybe, setting retention settings for data that's stored inside table spaces. So if I want to set a retention for security events or syslog or the common event logs that we bring in, or if we have other data sets that are first party or third party through the data connector pieces, we can now go in and do that. We can set that retention by data type and store that within the log analytics framework itself. We don't cover that here in this section of the workbook, but this is certainly something that I've had feedback around. And so in this video, I'll talk about it. And that is, we can also consider retention outside of Sentinel and outside of log analytics, leveraging services like Azure Data Explorer or Azure Blob Storage. And so we have a lot of customers, and Richard, I'm sure you've worked with a lot of customers and partners that have said, hey, we don't want to store it long-term in Sentinel and log analytics, but we want to store it in something like Azure Data Explorer, or we want to store it in something like, Azure Blob Storage. And what's the value of doing that versus storing it in log analytics? And the value really is about the responsiveness of the data after you've archived it or after you've stored it for retention. That's really what the value is. And so if you've got to have that performant data for queries, hunting, and looking at that data in a performant nature, storing it in log analytics will get you that. On top of that, you can still get that level of performance now with our cross workspace queries within Azure Data Explorer. So now I can go store that data in Azure Data Explorer. I can read that data as it is in place and have the read results of that data come back into my log analytics UI. And then I can join the read of that data to other data sets within my KQL queries. So there's a lot of flexibility between log analytics and Azure Data Explorer. But if you're looking for...
This is definitely a hot topic, and I think you'll see more and more communication coming out from the Sentinel team as they start to work on how does this actually fit in the overall landscape. So one other thing I'll mention on this one, it is a new area to look into. The idea is not necessarily to put everything into Azure Sentinel. If you're collecting large volumes of data because your governance standard says that you must collect and retain data for 2 years, if you're not looking at the data in Azure Sentinel, you probably shouldn't put it in Azure Sentinel to start with. You should put it into Azure Data Explorer. If it's active data that's actually got an analytics rule applied to it and you're doing something with it and you're making the most of the Sentinel capabilities, then yes, you should put it into Sentinel. But what you'll find, this is the balance. This is why this page is here. Do the research and understand the cost differences and the usefulness of the data, like you said, not only on when you go to archive it after 90 days is the Sentinel's default. So there's no point doing less than 90. But if you choose to do more for retention, then yes, Sentinel or Data Explorer, but also on ingestion. Think about it comes into Sentinel by default. That's where the connectors are. But if I'm not looking at the data, I'm just putting it there, and arguably, I'm not using my budget the best way I could do. That's probably the nicest way to put it.
I like that.
And we want you to make the most of that budget. We don't want you to waste money on just bringing in all your data and not using it. We want you to see value in it. So yeah, certainly come back and review this on a regular basis and make sure that your costs meet your needs.
Yeah, and there's going to be updates to this section of the workbook as new versions of the workbook come out. So, keep that in mind as well.
Great.
Under the additional resources, we did create a couple of links though. This is something that we were asked a lot for, and one of the things that customers would ask for a lot was around the troubleshooting of why is the usage higher than expected. So helping them with KQL queries to walk through that. Then that led to a workbook called the Workspace Usage Workbook that you can now go and deploy out of the workbook template, very much like this workbook, that will show you cost analysis and latency, that will show you table usage and break down by volume and events per second and gigabytes, and show you, what's the most data that you're using, what's the least data that you're using. So there's a lot of opportunities here to think about retention of data, as well as applicable use of that data as it pertains to retention, and whether or not that is data that even should be stored in the first place, right? And if you're not getting value out of it, let's kick it out of there.
Let's eat it. Yeah, I can give you another example on this one as well, something to look out for. So if you've had Azure Sentinel running for, let's say, 3 months is probably a nice period of time. You get into that period of time where you think about removing data automatically, and you're going to review this. After about 3 months, you can actually go back through those workbooks and look at the ingestion rate of Azure Sentinel on a per day basis. And when you see the volume of data coming in every day, you may see some trends that, depending on the day of the week or the week of the month or the month of the year, you may find that you sometimes ingest more data, like Monday to Friday, than you do on a weekend. And this is where it's good that Azure Sentinel is charged on a per day basis, because you pay for what you use. So if you don't use as much on a weekend, you can save. That goes back to making sure that you've got the right reservation tiers and also the right data coming in at the right times. There is a need to look at, what if your data drops below what you expect? You could have a misconfiguration where you're not bringing data in that you thought you were, because somebody misconfigured a firewall or a rule somewhere and blocked the data coming in. And on the other side of that is, what if you have a spike of data? So you could have a very bad day where a lot of data was generated because you may have had an attack, you may have had something misconfigured and it flooded, too much data coming in. And so one of the rules you should think about putting in place early on is to check on a daily basis how much you expect to come in, and then maybe alert your team if more or less data comes in than what you were expecting, given some parameters. It's not a security alert on its own, but it certainly is going to help you with cost analysis and ensuring that your configuration's done. So I'd say that's like a health check on Sentinel itself and the way you've got your configurations going. And it all comes back to this of, what data am I bringing in? Why am I bringing it in? What is it costing me? And how long am I going to keep it for?
Well, I love that because, right, when we get into like the engineering incident management section, you could create an automation rule.
Nice.
And you create that, you create that analytic that is looking at the health or the threshold of that event volume. And if it falls below that threshold or spikes above that threshold, that automated rule then can come in here and tag this for the SOC engineering to come in and triage. Right. So now they have their own queue within the Sentinel incident blade that's carved away from all of the things that we're queuing up and triaging on the incident management side of things. Now it's been, carved off. And so that is a fantastic way to do that. Anything that is related to the health, care, and feeding of Sentinel, as well as the data that's being ingested into Sentinel, you could then make that part of that incident management on the engineering side.
Yeah, I think when you look at a lot of people will be coming from another SIEM that they may have used in the past. There was a lot of engineering you had to do around things like performance tuning and storage optimization and disaster recovery and backup. So we don't have those problems with Sentinel. The problems we have with Sentinel is more like this, where you do need to keep an eye on your data flows, and you need to understand it's a daily charge. So watch it, watch it carefully, and be aware. Cool. I think you're on to network diagrams.
All right, so our network diagrams is very much like our architecture. It's a placeholder. And I love, Richard, what you said earlier. If you don't want to put the diagrams here, but you want to link to them because they're secured off in a secure storage area, great. Link to them here so that anyone who needs access to them can quickly pivot to those network diagrams or that infrastructure architecture diagrams and be able to see, how are things communicating? How are things working within, the on-prem environment, the cloud environment, or a hybrid of both cloud to cloud, cloud to on-prem environments, and what that looks like. Because in the ever-growing world of devices and services and servers being on-prem and in the cloud, the analyst responsibility and the way that they're having to think through the connectivity, it just is continuing to grow, and it's almost become a burden. And so anything we can do to lighten that burden a little bit by providing this level of information and continuity is just going to strengthen their resolve to be able to protect the business.
Yep, and this would link back to things like SOC contacts. Who do you go to if you find an IP range that's suddenly pinging on your network and it's not in the diagrams and you've done the research? You go back to, okay, I need to escalate this to the networking team to find out where is this a new network or a risky entity? Exactly. I think a diagram does tell 1,000 words. You do need some basic diagrams that your SOC team can look at, even if it's not the full. You don't give them the full engineering networking diagrams they never can understand in a rapid succession. But you're right, like a link to that location, or at least to the team that they can run to, is exactly what we're looking for you.
Perfect. All right. In this section, we're going to spend a little bit more time talking about content development. And there's going to be cross collaboration here. You're going to have your engineering team. They're going to be partnering with the SOC analysts, and they need to, because they need to understand conceptually the design implications and impact behind some type of use cases and content that you're building out. So in this content development portion, we're really focused on analytic rules with scheduled queries. We've covered some of this, but really it's really detailed. It helps, analysts and engineers be able to understand how to step into the tool and create an analytic rule using the rule wizard, choosing from the analytics blade, picking a rule template, turning that template over, and then being able to apply, the type of goodness and Custo query language, entity mappings, incident relationships, all of those pieces of grouping things together, they all come to bear within the analytics rule wizard. In this particular instance, though, you can kind of see that we've got some screenshots on a custom rule. It hasn't been named. There's no description or tactics chosen or even a severity picked, because really we want them to be thinking about the fact that our analytics library is transparent. Yes, while you can choose from a wide range of analytics that have also been provided not only from internal Microsoft providers, but we have a community now that is providing a lot of analytical goodness. And those analytics are being pushed up into GitHub and then refreshed from GitHub directly into the analytic library. So now you're getting contributors like SOC Prime, right, who has built a menagerie of analytics as it pertains back to the MITRE ATT&CK framework. You're getting a lot of contributors that are building things. And I think one of the things that Sentinel has done that I'm kind of excited to even highlight is the fact that we're getting a community of contributors globally that are thinking through threats, use cases, indicators of both attack and compromise, and are providing a wide range of detections, both from an IoT side, from a cloud compute side, from an apps and services, from an on-prem, from a connector side. There's so many different avenues now that we're starting to see contribution from that I think it's really exciting. And so this allows customers to be able to step in and pick and choose something from the library and those templates, or if they know they've got some type of activity happening within their line of business that we don't offer an analytic towards, they can create their own. So really, it's about defining the rule logic. It's about scheduling out that rule, understanding the alert enhancement. We have some new capabilities here. One of the new features that I really like about this section is how we call out not only the entity mapping, but we've given you now the ability to say, this user on this host did this activity, and if we have mapped them correctly within the entity relationship, Sentinel can then go pull out that goodness as a variable and store it in the header, so that when that fires, that's what comes into the Sentinel blade, that all of that stuff is already there in the header as an entity mapping within the title of the incident. And that was something that our customers have been asking for. Is the generic alerts and incidents are great, but if we want to get more granular, because we know you're building these relationships between the data set and the entities, why can't we leverage that and pull that in to the title of our incident? Well, now you can certainly do that. This really gets down to, query scheduling. How much data do you want to query for? How often do you want to run that query? What's that threshold? How many are you looking for, right? How many events is enough so that you found what you're looking for, and then you alert on it, or then you create an incident based on that alert. Now, something that I want to talk about a little bit is whether or not you want to group these events and or group alerts. So in internal at Microsoft, some of the things that we thought about and the way that we do incident management and even SIM management is sometimes you'll have more than one alert based on a relationship, a host, a user, apps and services, processes, things that are going on inside an environment. And we know that that activity may fit into other sections of activity that a threat actor may choose to deploy. Maybe those activities come from some level of scripting through, a threat actor dropping a file and that file executing and doing something. And then we've got a subset of activities. And so you may want to group the alerts. And I think this is important to think about, because a lot of SOCs, when they start out, it's a one-to-one. Look for this, alert on this, right? I found it, I alerted on it. But when you start to think about the maturity model, you want to start to think about the one to the many. And that takes a little bit different mindset to think about, but it's important because you may say, I know I've got this alert and this alert and this alert and this alert, and I know I want to group those alerts together, and then I want to create an incident based on those alerts. If I see these things in any order and within this time range, then I want to create an incident. And otherwise, I don't want to create an incident unless, I have these pieces. And so you can kind of mix and match a little bit, kind of going from that one-to-one to that many-to-one or to that many-to-many, right? It really gives you a lot of flexibility in thinking about how to create the type of analytics that is important to drive the right context, right? We want to think through things holistically and build out that picture. The other thing we want to do is we want to help the analyst get to a better, faster, quicker root cause analysis. How do we do that? Well, we want to do that through a maturity model, thinking through alerts, thinking through tactics and techniques, thinking through the way that adversaries attack our environment and our lines of business. And we do that through growing, learning, understanding the daily tasks, understanding the internal threat intelligence that we're gathering through our daily operations calls and through our shift turnovers and our daily logs and our post-mortems as we're, if we do go to escalation or to crisis response. These are things that are important because now we can really start moving the needle on the analytic content creation from a one-to-one to a many-to-one and eventually to a many-to-many. And this is something I've talked about even in my own career is, wouldn't it be great if we could get away from reactive analytics to proactive analytics? And I think we're getting there. We're laying the foundational groundwork to be able to move us from being reactionary to being proactive and thinking through the next tactic that an attacker may leverage, because, well, we've seen these tactics. We know that what comes next is going to be something over here. I could be proactive and go hunt for it. I could be proactive and create a rule around it. I could be proactive and make sure I'm pulling in that data instead of being reactive and reacting to what the monitoring is telling me. So just some more food for thought as you're kind of thinking through content creation.
I got some parts for you there as well, because the other part of this is there's a few issues that I would just pull on a little bit more. So one of the problems with tuning alerts is you can't alert on everything, otherwise you'd end up with thousands of incidents, and they're not. There's thousands of alerts, but you want incidents to be created. So when you do tuning, if you over-tune, the risk is you don't get an alert or an incident because you've out-tuned it. It's part of the noise and you got rid of it. So we do have fusion rules that come into play, and they look for potentially missed alerts or things that were underlying, as in one or two low-level alerts, but when they're added together, they become very important, which is what you're saying as well. And then there's other areas to look at, like insider risk and user behavior. And again, like you're saying, go more proactive when you start to look at insider risk, which is a Microsoft 365 solution, and you've got user behavior in Azure Sentinel. Those are the areas I think we see that we start to rely on some levels of machine learning and not just having your analyst, the human being, trying to respond and react to hundreds in a day. I don't know what the statistics for this one are, Rin, maybe you do. When I was on a help desk, so not security, but just IT, I know in a 12-hour shift, I could probably handle between 100 to 120 calls per day in a 12-hour shift, and that was running, right? That was not quite log and flog, but we were certainly taking the call, answering as quick as you can, and get to the next one. So I wonder, on a security analyst, what is a reasonable expected number of incidents that they're going to be able to deal with in a shift before they just go, I don't know, I'm just going to log it, or it's going to start backlogging, you start having too many that you're not just going to get around to any.
It's actually a funnel. The level 1 analyst is going to be doing the queuing and triaging initially, and then handing that up to a level 2 analyst. Level 1 analyst, their EPA, their events per hour or their incidents per hour, should be pretty large, right? Because it's in a 2 to 4 hour window, they should be able to push through a lot of events or a lot of incidents. That when it gets to the level 2, level 3 analyst, that's when that EPA, those incidents per hour, stretches out, right? Because now they're having to go in, gather evidence, they're doing an investigation. It's going to take them a lot longer to deliver on that level of events per hour or incidents per hour. So it's kind of that funnel. It's the level 1 is trying to help reduce that noise, reduce that false positive, and really kick things up the tier channel that are events or incidents of interest. That's their goal, right? And then you kind of you cycle through those analysts to make sure that, hey, you delivered on this for 2 to 4 hours. Now we're going to rotate. This guy over here or this gal over here is going to take, and do that, and you're going to go do the investigation portion, again, helping to reduce churn and burnout. And
I think that's where we try to automate as much of that as we can. So maybe I've seen some models where we talk about getting rid of level 1 altogether and having most of it automated so that you only have level 2 onwards, but not practical for everybody. But if you have a small team, small budget, this is where a partner might be useful, and let the partner take on some of that larger intake. And tuning and automation and third-party products, anything that helps to reduce that, to give you, like you said, the insights. I just want the ticket, the insights, I want the useful stuff. The more we get that down to level 2, the better. But again, these are all important points to come back and look at. Did we miss something? Because if you missed it, you come back here and look at, yeah, we tuned that out. That's why we missed it. It's not that we didn't catch it in the logs. We just didn't create an alert on it because it was too much noise. And so, again, really important to come back and reevaluate your assumptions you might have made last time.
I love that. I think that's absolutely applicable. We've got to be validating our assumptions, and we've got to be putting in best practices that snap to those assumptions, so that we're pulling out alert enrichment, we're pulling out impact, right? We're pulling out the appropriate level of action that we need to take, right? And so that kind of leads me into this next area. where as we dive into alert enrichment, as we're diving into best practices and creating our rules, we've given you some things to think about. We've given you, query length and ADX functions as it ties back to Azure Data Explorer, along with log analytics. Just things to think about, things to consider, as you're leveraging certain functions within the Kusto query language itself. We call out alert enrichment on how to pull out the right alert enrichment through extended entity mapping. Now Sentinel has given you a list, it's a laundry list of the type of entities that you can map to, from processes, hashes, to apps and services, to communication, to all of these things, and being able to do them even in multiples. So if you have a destination and a source and they both fit to an IP address, you can call that out so that now well, this was the destination, this was the source, and you have directionality. Same thing on users, same thing on processes, as well as on hosts and other entity types. So this is all really important to think through and kind of work through, because to your earlier point, Richard, if you're not taking into consideration the assumptions and the things that you're building into your Kusto query model and pulling that data back, right, then it's just going to generate noise, and it's not going to have the impact that you're intending. Really just kind of flushes out more on the analytic wizard side. One of my favorite portions of the Rule Wizard is the result simulation. This kind of gives you an idea to look at what results look like across that simulation. This is a feature enhancement in Sentinel that I just love, so that as you're testing your query, you can go hit that result simulation and see it there without having to step out of your Rule Wizard and looking at what the query results may be telling you. Now you've got it graphed. And it's not only graphed, but it's graphed over time. This is a great way to help you define whether or not your analytics rule is going to be way too noisy, or if you need to tune back, to your earlier point. Event grouping and rule suppression is another capability to certainly be thinking about. And we give you some great food for thought here, things to consider around event grouping and rule suppression, things to understand between the difference of events and alerts, things to understand around how to configure the incident creation settings. And this gets back to my earlier statement of that many to many, right? So as you're thinking through the methodology, you're thinking through how it's going to impact, you're thinking through the business value, that return on analytic, what it's doing for you. Are you pulling back the right results, and are those results actionable? Are you making the right decisions around that and then applying them into an incident? Do I need to group them with other alerts, or do I need to make that one-to-one decision where it may be more on the atomic side of the rule creation? Same thing with the incident settings and alert grouping. So this kind of groups those pieces together. Another section that I love is that automation, alert automation, where we want to assign playbooks. And I think this is, this could be a section all on its own at some point in a future date. But for now, suffice it to say that there's a lot that's going to go into workbook creation, or excuse me, playbook creation, and what that playbook may do, from pulling data, ingesting data, making an API call. Maybe it's talking to something that is, cloud to cloud or on-prem to cloud. Maybe it's making decisions based on, the entities and the information that you're passing it. There's a lot to be considered in the way that a playbook is created and written to deliver on the type of automational excellence that a lot of folks are getting to. And so my advice is, but before you get to that place, you really want to focus on what the day-to-day operations looks like for your SOC analyst on the human side. Then you take all of those things, and if you've got so much that is rinsing and repeating, then you automate that. It's like, you know what? We do this so often that we really want to free this person up to go do these things, let's automate that. Let's put that into a playbook. Let's make that part of our analytic experience. It's that kind of thing that you should be looking for and turning those opportunities and those exercises into a playbook. And I don't know that a lot of customers really think about it in that way. I think they think about, oh, well, I've got to have this automation for this, and maybe I need to go, make sure that I already have these pieces in place when I onboard an analytic. And from my experiences of building out SOCs and looking at automation, it should come second. And you shouldn't worry about whether or not you have a playbook or an automated experience to snap to an analytic rule. No, rather, let's get the right processes in place and then understand what those processes are, and then learn whether or not we can turn those processes into some type of automation.
Very cool. Great stuff.
All right, we're kind of getting to the close of this section. This really is about how to understand how to do that rule creation. We've got some troubleshooting links for you as well to help you kind of troubleshoot some of those areas. And then if there's other things that you need to consider, making sure that you're partnering with your teams to provide that operational insight where applicable for these level of content creation. All right. Azure infrastructure monitoring is pretty light. There's not a lot here. It really is about how Microsoft is thinking about the infrastructure monitoring. I get this asked a lot. Customers are asking, well, does Microsoft monitor its own infrastructure? Does Microsoft provide vulnerability scanning and management? Does Microsoft have its own incident management as it pertains to Azure infrastructure? And the answers to that is yes, 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 and yes. Right. So this really just carves out how, our own incident response team on the Azure infrastructure side is working in conjunction with your tools, your resources in Azure, within Azure Sentinel, and within the services that you've come to rely on. So that we can upkeep those services and that you've got a really nice uptime on those services. That's really what this is talking about. Talking about how we can deliver on that. And then how you can also leverage protective monitoring using like the Microsoft monitoring agent, which is now the Azure monitoring agent, and bringing in data through that data connector method. Right. And so that's really what this is it's kind of that placeholder to understand how the Azure infrastructure monitoring and configuration and change management looks across the board from that side of it. So pretty straightforward, not a lot here that needs to be changed because this is more on the Microsoft side than it is on the customer side. We showed this earlier. This is the engineering incident management. This ties back to that workflow, the description of how to escalate system issues to the engineering team. Those system issues could be, issues within an analytic, the way that it may be too noisy. It could be role-based access to a given resource within Azure Sentinel, right? Whatever the case may be, this is how you would engage with the engineering lead that snaps back to Azure Sentinel and to your overall SOC practice. This is with that workflow. And if you have, procedures in place today on how to engage with your own SOC engineering lead, great. Feel free to leverage this section and to make any changes where applicable to snap to those processes or procedures that you may have already, built an outcome towards. In this particular instance, though, we've thought through some of those detailed steps around opening an incident, doing incident review, what the resolution may look like, and incident closure. So it's on the incident management side. We alluded to it earlier in the conversation, but now you have it's a path forward to be able to escalate. The SOC can escalate to an engineering resource within the SOC as it pertains to resources that live within Azure Sentinel and what that looks like, so that you can follow up with them, kind of timelines of resolution of where things are, incident tagging for the SOC engineering, being able to apply a stage like closed, and change the status of the incident around false positive and incorrect alert logic or incorrect data, being able to measure those pieces there as well as KPIs, but also being able to track them with this type of incident closure. And this is our last section for this video series. This really dives into the user access control design. Not a lot to change here, because really what we've done is we've pulled in all of the Azure role-based access model for Azure Sentinel, the subscription, the resources that tie into that subscription, from log analytics to other resources like workbooks and peripherals and artifacts that snap back to Azure Sentinel. They're stored within that resource group as you spin up Sentinel and attach that to a log analytics workspace, and then you apply role-based access. This section really is to help those that are operating within the SOC as well as in the engineering practice to know how to apply the right user-based access control design. So we talk a lot about the roles that work within Azure Sentinel, what those specific roles are. We have reader, responder, and contributor, and what they can do, so that if you want to pare down the type of role-based access, you can pare that down and say, okay, well, I'm just going to give you reader access, or this is a responder, this is an analyst, this is an incident responder who needs access to manage incidents, to assign and dismiss. Right? They have all of the ability to look at data, work within workbooks, and access to those Sentinel resources. But in addition, they can manage incidents, and that's important as a responder, right? Because that's their function and that's their role. As a contributor can do all of the things that a reader and a responder can do above and beyond, but now we're thinking about content creation. We're thinking about how to edit workbooks, build out analytic rules, and create other resources like KQL queries, bookmarks, being able to do some of those type of additional resources and access to those things. And then we also have the Azure Sentinel automation contributor that can add playbooks and automation rules. And so you may want to pair some of these permissions together. You may want to separate them under their own roles and responsibilities and keep segmentation of duties per your business. Whatever that may look like, there's certainly a role that you can apply that has the right resource access within Azure Sentinel to be applied. Other things to consider, we've also provided additional roles, looking at how to work with playbooks, connecting data sources, allowing guest users to assign incidents, and creating and deleting workbooks, and how to think about what that role-based access might look like. We've also built in for you a Sentinel roles and allowed actions table. This table kind of gives you what the role is, with a check mark on, can I create a playbook? Can I create and edit analytic rules? Can I manage incidents? Or can I just view the data? What does that look like? And so from a CISO level, maybe you want to give them read only. They can come in, view, read workbooks, see the type of KPIs and metrics, but that's it. They can't touch, they can't edit, they can't make changes, right? But they can view. And from a higher level senior leadership, that's important. They want to know how well are things driving? Is it effective? And are we deploying the right type of actions that are leading to that effectiveness? And then last but not least, we've really kind of customized this section where you can build in custom roles and advanced Azure role-based access. So we've got a lot of customers that say, yeah, these roles are great, but what if I want to mix and match? Or what if I want to pull in, contributing access to other resources outside of Sentinel as part of that role-based access? Well, you can certainly do that. And you do that through custom roles. By creating those custom roles, applying the permissions that those roles offer, and to the resources that they have access to. Then what we've done is we've given you links on managing log data within the workspaces in Azure Monitor, how to understand resource context for the role-based access controls, as well as this table level role-based access. We have this highlighted here, but we also have a link within this section. All of this gives a lot of great contextual knowledge around how to apply the right role-based access to the right resources, and making sure that you're doing so under a least privilege level of access. And then if you need to elevate on that privilege, right, doing so through something just enough access, right, that and providing that so that they can elevate to these additional roles where applicable, where needed, but it may not necessarily be all the time. It may be a subset of time, or it may be depending on how their role moves within their time box, right? And the type of activities they're doing, you know, from hour to hour. Whatever that looks like within your line of business, we've given you a model and a way for you to be able to consider different role-based access and mix and match where applicable and appropriate. Well, that concludes this section of the video. Happy that you've stayed with us this far. This is fantastic. But now I'm going to turn it back over to you, Richard.
Great, thank you, Rin. Get more content that I'm just loving it all. So when we come back, we're going to do one more video. This is the last one. We're going to talk about the SOC actions. So we talked about it in a previous video, how you would be able to take something like a watch list, and you would be able to use that to then create actions for the SOC. We're going to show you how to do that. So join us again next time. Thanks, Rin.